one of the members of the committee. You have voice in this process. Anybody else should, you're welcome to stay here and be on the computer, or you may also watch on CAT TV channel 1085 or on their Facebook site. Either way works, or any of those ways works. We're here to hopefully prepare a policy for the Bennington PD on domestic violence investigation. And I have I want us to do, I'm gonna sort of lay out how we're gonna go, and then we'll have some introductions and then move on. So today, after we introduce ourselves, we'll do an introduction about our task and the process so that everybody is very clear about how this will work all the way through to eventual adoption. And it will, I might as well state that right now. No, actually, I'll wait. Eventually, then what I'm going to ask is that we outline for each other our own issues that we see regarding the policy or policies. That's one of the issues, actually, that are of concern to us, that we can ideally make sure that we have sort of a checklist of things that we want to make sure we cover. And then we can go into the model policy itself, knowing that there's nothing in this model policy that is set in stone at this point. That's why it's a model. And work on particularly the purpose, policy, and definitions, procedural questions about procedure or suggestions. We can make those suggestions. They eventually will go to the PD, and then the PD will post those along with the policies, the policy that is drafted by us today and passed by the select board eventually. It is my intent for us to, since this is now my third meeting of the day on Zoom, is to take about a 5-minute break at about 2:30, just so that I can stand up and we can do whatever we need to get done, and then be back after 5 minutes and finish up. And if we're finished before 4, there's nothing magical about waiting until 4. I'm quite frankly not optimistic that we will be able to leave early, but hey, you never know. So let me just introduce myself and give you sort of a sense of who I am for those of you who do not know. I've lived in Bennington for about 25 years. Moving here, before that, I was a legal services attorney in Syracuse, New York, running a project for people with HIV and AIDS. And before that, before law school and that, I was and still am a retired United Methodist minister. I'm a member of the select board. I was a semi-professional trombone player at one time, and worked my way through college playing on a riverboat in the St. Lawrence River. So, yep, what fun. So, who would like to introduce themselves next? Go in any order, or do I have to pick you? Dan, Officer Ferrara. Your microphone is off, yeah. Is on. Yeah, it's off, so on it's on. It's working, okay. So you might as well go.
All right, Officer Ferrara, Bennington Police Department. Been with the police department for over 4 years now. Before that, I have experience with the sheriff's department as well for a couple of years. Are we doing the fun facts again?
Why not? Pick something.
All right. So as I said last time, I'm running pretty thin on my fun facts, but I guess I'll go off of your musical talent. And I was a cellist all through my school years, from 4th grade all the way through graduation.
Really? I love finding that kind of stuff out about you, Dan. Thank you. Lauren, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'll go. So my name is Lauren Wilcox. I am an advocate with PAVE. I've been at PAVE a little over 7 years. I started out as a hotline volunteer. I went into emergency housing, and now currently I am the Department of Corrections advocate. So PAVE has an office over at DOC, and we work with folks who are involved in the criminal justice system. Fun fact about me. I know a lot of boring information about British history because that is what I am interested in.
Good. Love it. Thank you. Peter.
Okay, I'm Peter Lawrence. I am a retired attorney. I've been in Bennington for it's about 36 years, and was a practicing attorney during that time, with the big my practice being in family court and involved in domestic violence matters. I am now completely retired, but I guess as a fun fact, not necessarily a fun fact, but I'm a little taken aback, Bruce and Officer Dan, that both of you are these accomplished musicians, and neither of you participated with Sage City Symphony, I was the president of their board, along with Dan's father as the vice president, for like 20 years.
I know.
And neither of you better both go sign up when they can do that. They always need violinist and trombone players.
They always had good trombone. They always have very good trombone players. But it's good to know. Janice?
Well, at first I apologize for not having my picture up, but something is beyond me today to do that. So I'm incognito, but I'm trained as a social worker and have worked with Sunrise Family Resource Center for over 30 years. Also spent some time with United Counseling, working with families, and before that with what's now DCF, doing child protective work. So my whole career was devoted to working with families, often under very stressful conditions. I also was part of the first police domestic violence group here in town. It was many years ago. So I'm interested in how things have progressed on that over time. I'm retired now. And my fun fact is that I'm very involved in Japanese gardening. And this was a wonderful year to do it because I was home all the time and the weather was good. So that's me.
Thank you, Janice. Sorry about the phone in the background. Eleanor.
Hello, my name is Eleanor. I'm a student at Bennington College. This is my junior year, and I'm studying restorative justice and conflict resolution. My fun fact, I'm originally from Portland, Maine. I'm actually back there at the moment because our classes have gone remote for the rest of term. So not in Bennington right now, but I'll be back soon.
Great. I hope Portland is not getting snow right now. Okay.
Lovely weather right now.
It'll come your way. Dan Monks.
Hello, everyone. Let's see. I'm the assistant town manager for the town of Bennington. I've worked for the town now for about 22 years. Doesn't seem that long to me, but I can't believe 20 years have come and gone so quickly. I grew up in North Bennington, where my father still lives. And let's see, before I came to the town, I practiced law. What I'll call a law factory is one of those huge DC law firms, about 300 to 400 attorneys. So that's what I did before I came to work for the town.
Okay, and also on this in this process with us is Linda Bermudez, who is going to be manipulating the model policy as we go along. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for being willing to be a part of this. I really look forward to this conversation and to our work together. Just so that everybody's on the same page, our job particularly is to focus on policy, less on procedure. But policy in this sense really does include the purpose statement or purpose statements, if there are 2 or 3, as many as we wish. The policy in this instance probably is going to be longer than the model policy statement, and it can be in paragraphs. And definitions, and it could be any of these and more, or things that you think are missing that need to be there to be defined, even if it's not yet in the policy. If it's going to be in the procedure, we will want definitions for them where they are appropriate, or where we think they're appropriate. Dan and I have been a part of each of the now 6 sessions for 8 total policies. We're going to be doing this again in January, February, and March, and early April, late January to early April. So if any of you wish to be a part of this again, you'll all be getting an email relatively soon, sometime in the next month. The process will be that once we finish today, our draft will go to Dan. Dan will take a look at it, clean up whatever cleanup he thinks needs to be done. He'll send it to me. And usually by the following week, I will have sent it out to each of you for your look through, so that you are in agreement with what we have, what we all think we have done. It's really important. Sometimes there are things that you thought or I thought we had done, and it didn't appear that that's on the page. So not through any fault of our scribe, but through probably the fault of the chair. So it's important that we actually look through that. I'll give you about 48 to 72 hours to look through that and get it back to me, so that I can then hand it off, clean up any messes that you found that I didn't see earlier, so that we can get it to the town attorney, to the chief of police, and to the state's attorney. And then once it comes back, particularly from the chief and from the town attorney, if the state's attorney has a question about it, she will certainly communicate with us. But it's the town attorney and the chief of police will be looking toward. At that point, it'll go to the select board for an initial reading, and then adoption at least one meeting later than that, after comment by the general population. We're right in the middle of that process right now with the first 3, use of force and use of conducted electrical weapons and duty to intervene. Thank you. So that's what's happening. But this process, I think, is really a critical process, and that is to try to put together what we think is the guiding principles under which the Bennington Police Department can operate and work on, in this case, the investigation, what I would call domestic violence investigation, or the investigation of domestic violence policy. Okay. So is that process essentially clear for all of us? Yeah. The only other thing I would add is that this policy, probably by the time it even gets back to you after our work tonight, will have a different header on the top. It's essentially the header for all policies that we're drafting. It comes out of the League of Cities and Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and it will have statutory references on it. It will have other related policy references on it. So if, for instance, if you think we should be referring to another policy in this one, or we should at least have officers making sure that they know another policy when they're working under this one, that that we should know that, note that even today if we can, or at any time in the process. So that header will be there. It'll have a number of other items on it, particularly the date that it gets adopted and the date that it is due for review. That way we don't end up with something that's 25 years old. That would be bad. So what I'd like to do, and just to open it up, and I'm not going to necessarily call on you, but you can, if you wish to use the raise your hand scenario, that's fine. But we're a small group, you can raise your hand to me. If you, what I'd like us to do is go through and identify issues that we've already seen that we want to make sure that we address today. Okay? So if you want to, if anybody wants to start with that.
Since you can't see my hand, I guess.
Oh, that's true, Janice, go ahead.
Janice, can I go first?
Mhm.
Hey, well, some of the things I wondered about is that the use of the term victim and survivor, and whether there are places where it could be one or the other, or whether one is preferable overall to the other. I happen to like to be able to use survivor as often as it fits. The other is that this model policy, the IACP one, is copyrighted. So just wonder how that might enter in to what we can use or how we can use it.
Janice, I can answer that one quickly for everybody.
Okay.
That's a good pickup, and I had meant to say something about it. Though it is copyrighted, we, through they're the ones that provided us with this copyrighted version and said, use whatever part of this you wish. And you may, you know, we don't have to cite them in the, once we've modified it. That's
Okay.
the agreement between IACP and the town.
Okay, great.
But thank you.
In their report on the Bennington Police Department policies, they made a couple of comments I just wanted to reference. One is the importance of having policy that includes the LGBT community, and also they mentioned strangulation, evaluation of strangulation. So the local policy for the PD doesn't have that, but this one does, as does the state police one, but just to make sure that we're dealing with that. And also assault to people beyond what we traditionally think of as domestic violence, and assault to older persons too. And while there were many things I liked about the IACP model policy, it doesn't zero in on the local situation as much. So I think just paying attention to that. And the last thing, one area to mention is the treatment of children, and referencing the DCF policy somewhere about how they regard what's in the best interest of children in a domestic violence situation. And that's what
Good. Thank you, Janice. Go ahead, Peter.
That was an area that I wanted to, when I was reading this, focused on too, that the discussion, or to just how the policy interacts with the treatment of children and the impacts of not only on children, on the people involved in the domestic violence, the other people, the perpetrator and the survivor, whichever terms, using that. I also had an area that I highlighted about what is said to the people in the regarding an abuse protection order, that we need to, I think there's some clarification can be done there. There's also a number of areas where I highlighted in the IACP model policy, just areas where I had questions about really clarifications, and I figured that as we go through those will come up. But language regarding children and how children are dealt with, and what information can be and what information should not be given to the parties. Those are the two main areas for me.
Great. Thank you, Peter. My list is getting smaller, so that's great. Others? Lauren?
I want to chip in because Janice, you really hit the nail on the head with a lot of things that you were bringing up, and Peter as well. And I know that as far as language goes, survivor and victim, they're used interchangeably, even in the advocacy world, but I would say survivor is the preferred term that we would go with. And some of the things in the IACP document that I really liked was establishing MOUs with the local victim service providers, which would be us, which we would be very welcome to doing with the Bennington Police Department. And there are some things in the BPD sort of protocol that that include PAVE that are not best practice. Do you want me to go into that now, or should I wait? You're muted, Bruce.
Sorry, yep. I think we can wait, but I agree with you. That's one of the reasons why we're using the model policy from IACP, at least from my perspective. It's one of the reasons I made the decision sort of directly. I'm not saying that the PD is doing those things already still, but yeah, that's we will likely come across them, so that's great. I'm glad for the expertise here around the table. Others issues that we want to make sure that we cover? Eleanor, do you have anything else?
I think everything on my list has already been added. I did want to definitely talk about the victim versus survivor language and the treatment of children. Those are sort of the big ones for me, but we've got those.
Good. Let me, Dan, are you the other Dan Monks?
No, I think that everybody hit on the things that I was concerned about.
Okay, let me just, I'll just raise the things that I have connected with in addition to what you've already said. A more general question is, you know, the protocol from the PD has one protocol for when the subject of the investigation is a police officer, law enforcement officer, and one when it's not. And the IACP is a overarching policy for both scenarios. It's you know, sometimes I think 2 is better, but in this case, I actually think 1 is better. I'd like to be able to say that we would treat, I know there are some other issues involved when the subject is a police officer, and there may need to be a procedure there for when a police officer is involved as the subject or as the survivor for that matter. So, but that could be a part of the same policy. So the question is 1 or 2. And what do we think? I had as well, and Lauren, I was going to ask you, and Dan, I didn't get it out to you earlier. Does the PD already have an MOU with PAVE? They may have a relationship, but is there an MOU, a memorandum of understanding?
No, there is not.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. Good. And Peter, I don't know enough to know what the sharing of information issues are, but that was on my list of things to think about. The other one for me is, and it's not in the IICP, at least not that I remember seeing, and that is an assessment of the lethality risk and the use of the relatively new removal of firearms statute in now that that's available. And do we want to say anything about that in the policy part, that there should be an assessment at least done, and then let the statute then take over? So that's one of the places I'm thinking. Oh, and the other one is just making sure that anything, I also went back to the old ICP report. It seems old now, but it's not. And that was the conflict regarding a complaint process, and making sure that the complaint process is followed as, I mean, that would be where you'd refer to the current policy, which doesn't require written complaints, but rather just regular, even a verbal complaint can be a complaint. So those are my issues. I think we've pretty much made a list. Let me just, does anybody have anything else to add to that list? Seems like it's enough.
Bruce, I just wanted to make one other comment. It's Janice.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's that I was struck by the difference between the Bennington police policy in general and the one towards dealing with members, which had many of the things that I thought was missing from the general policy included. There just seemed to be a different mindset going into that. So I'm curious about that. I mean, they had, the member one had the sections on purpose and policy and definitions. And
right.
All that.
Right. And part of that, I'm attributing to the difference between when they were originally drafted.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And the model is, or the mode at the moment seems to go toward, and in some ways, I think the domestic violence by members policy is a better structure for a policy, and it has some better language in it. Although it too needs, it was amended in 2014. So some of that makes a difference. And I think the initial notion, which was that this is that the initial one was really a protocol. And when you start writing protocols, you think differently than when you start writing policy.
Right.
I think that's becoming clearer. And the chief, I think, is in agreement with this, that he would like to see something that looks a lot more like the one that you referred to, the members one. And it can have multiple purposes, just like that one, and it can have multiple policy paragraphs. So we can be free to add more to that so that it doesn't look quite as thin, as I would put it that way, as the IACP one does. It can provide more guidance to the procedure, if that makes any sense. I hope it does. Okay. So when we're working through these, I think we can feel free to utilize any of these sources in the creation of what will eventually be the town's document. There are a couple of just nuts and bolts things that we have discovered that we can do, and so we don't need to raise them other than for me to say, if we're dealing with an IACP or in another case, a League of Cities and Towns policy, it always talks about the agency. We want to be much more explicit, and we will always say the Bennington Police Department, and then we'll put that in parentheses the first time, and from that point on, it's BPD. So so that's a universal change. We're making them in every single one. We don't need to worry too much about it today. But that's also for Linda's just remembrance that that's how we're going to do this. So whenever it talks about the agency, instead of it's to establish the Bennington Police Department priorities, guidelines, and procedures, whatever. That's what we will then put it in as BPD after that. Okay. I'd be curious what we all think about what is the, I noticed immediately that the purpose statements for domestic violence by members from the Bennington PD and is really much more comprehensive. I think it's newer. What do you make of the purpose statement from the IACP, and what would you like to see in there? It doesn't have to be long, because what's going to be longer is the policy statements. I'm ready when you are. This will hopefully allow us to come to an agreement. Do we need one policy or two? Because that last, to include when the subject of the investigation, I would say, is a law enforcement officer. And that would include Bennington PD, but it would also include sheriff, state police officer, whatever. What do you think? Dan, what do you think?
Which one?
Dan, oh, sorry. Dan Ferrara, what do you think?
I mean, as you pointed out, in our current policies, we do have two separate policies. One being,
Right.
or the general order with the domestic violence by members, and then we have the generic domestic violence.
Right.
The reading through our policy in reference to the members being included in it, it is
Yeah.
a little more intricate because there's more responsibilities put on supervisory and administration
Right.
in times like that.
Right.
So,
So you would
I mean, it's,
include that in the procedure. Right.
yeah. So, I mean, it's, you technically you could lump it all into one big policy, or keep it two separate policies. That way it would be easier to reference, and just be a little bit easier to read, rather than trying to figure out if the part that you're reading pertains to this, or if it pertains to a member being involved.
Mm-hmm. Others?
Bruce, I think that this is Dan Monks. My
I can see it.
my preference would be to have one policy, even if we were to break out two separate and very distinct procedures later on after the policy, purpose policy and definitions. I just think it's clearer and it's more comprehensive, and we can have very distinct procedures for when a law enforcement officer is concerned, is part of the investigation or a subject of the investigation. But I just think that's the best and cleanest way to deal with it.
Let me just give the reason why. Dan, thank you, Dan. The reason I would try to push for one is because I, for one, want to send a message to the entire community that when we're talking about an investigation of domestic violence, that the police are included. Essentially, if for some reason they are the subject or the survivor of a domestic violence incident, that they are treated just like everybody else, even though there will be some other special requirements for supervisors, for other officers, et cetera, that they are not, in some sense, different. And yes, there are differences. I understand that, but they are essentially under the concerns that we would have in terms of policy would be the same, whether the subject or the, Janice, there you are. Whether the subject or the survivor was a law enforcement officer or me. Yep, Janice.
One thing I really appreciated in that policy is the language about prevention measures, which I'd hate. It adds to the length of it, but it felt really positive to have that whole section in there, both in terms of administration and in terms of members. So it's a lot to include to roll it into one policy, and I wouldn't want to lose any of that. It isn't in the IACP policy, for instance, now.
Right. And
that, yeah.
right.
So preserving that in some way.
Well, yes, and that I think where Dan is suggesting there may be separate procedures, and logistically, it's going to be if all goes well, it will not be. They will be flipping through pages. There will be this will be on a computer, so that they will be able to flip to the procedures for members. So we could literally have, I mean, you're right. I think the whole notion, the prevention section is really the department as an employer and that relationship. And I wouldn't want to lose that either. And it's not exactly, and it would not remotely be the same in a more general situation.
Yeah.
But so with the proviso that we don't lose that prevention, and that we may very well think of two separate procedure sections, one for members, one for everybody else. Can we think of the policy and definitions and purpose sections as essentially being universal and applicable to all? I think that's a better way of saying my question. Thank you for everybody for that. Do I see nods? Yeah?
Yes.
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 Yep. Lauren says yes. Eleanor says yes. Dan, you're okay with that?
Bruce,
Good. Yep.
just one clarification, and I know that, we get so, it's very difficult to distinguish between policy and procedure and protocol. But I think that folks should be aware that the protocols and procedures that are currently in place, that the PD have, they'll largely stay in place, but be modified to comply with the policy. So to Janice's point, that prevention part is not going to be removed. It may be modified and strengthened, but we're not going to lose any of the existing procedures unless they're inconsistent with our new policy. So I think that's just so folks know, because we're not going to be able to go through all 50 pages of policies and of procedures today, but they're going to have to conform to whatever we come up with today for policy language. So just I know you've already said that, but just to clarify for folks.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when one of the reasons why this goes to the chief is that the chief will look at it and say, okay, that's the procedure, that's the policy that looks like it's going to be adopted or something very close to that. The chief is then going to have work with the lieutenant and others to go through their procedures, which is really what the protocol is. Go through the procedures and update those to the new policy that the select board will adopt. And both of those together, linked together, will be posted on the Bennington PD page, website. So that the idea is that both policies that we're working on today and the procedures that the Bennington PD will put together as a result, probably a lot based on, some of it based on the protocol. When you know that there is stuff in the protocol or elsewhere that is not best practice, we want to make note of that so that I can send that in a separate memo to the chief. We know, I think he's waiting for that because he knows that that's the case. So that's, again, if we can think broadly on the policy level and let the chief worry about the procedure level. The chief, I don't think wants to eliminate, but I think we can send him a note saying, we think that there should be two separate procedures aiming at the same, derived from the same policy, if that makes sense. Good. So are we ready to move forward then to the, to try to generate a purpose statement or two? And then it's the policy statements, which I think are going to be, need to be beefed up as I see it from this one, but we can at least get started. Oh yeah, we're moving along lovely. I won't mention any names, but 2 weeks ago, we weren't remotely this far. So at any rate, and by the way, one of the reasons why Dan Ferrara is here is if you have questions about current practice or what his experience is, you should feel absolutely free to ask him. He's very good at giving you up-to-date answers. Oh, and I have one other thing that I wanted to make note of, and that is, to some degree, since we're talking about the Bennington PD, and this seems to be an issue that's coming up a lot, it seems to me that we need to at least be inclusive in our thinking to include dispatch and others, because how things get dispatched, how information gets sent out, and granted they are not the starting point, it may be how things get called in and to whom they get called in, but at least as much as possible, we can be inclusive of the work of the dispatch team. That's what I was thinking. So let's talk purpose. What should we be saying about the purpose of this policy? And yes, Linda, you can change, you can cross out agency and just put in Bennington Police Department. And then after that, in parentheses, BPD. Yep.
Well, then wouldn't
Actually-
we say, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
that it would be followed not only by law enforcement officers, but I don't know quite the language. Maybe you can help Dan on that, but other people who respond are part of the response. I mean,
Right.
So
yeah.
including dispatch, yeah, right? Janice, is that what you
Right.
mean?
Yeah, would there be a generic term that would include all of that? I mean, a
Followed by, oh, I see what you mean, right? After the word officers
And personnel.
and other personnel.
personnel? Yes.
And other personnel. Dan, would that,
Yep. Either
Yeah,
or the language that's used in our policies, the communications or dispatchers or
right, I'm looking at that.
dispatchers is a pretty easy term that I think everybody both in and out
Okay.
of law enforcement know what it is.
Right. I said followed by law enforcement officers and dispatch or dispatchers. So
Yep,
Linda, try that.
dispatchers.
Yep, Linda,
Bruce?
try that right where your point is, and dispatchers.
Well, do we want this to be as, in terms of people who work at the Bennington Police Department as broad as possible. So was filed by law enforcement officers and all other staff of the Bennington Police Department, or all other employees, something like that. Because
Peter, I agree.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
and,
I think
Dan
dispatch is
Ferrara.
too specific.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be like, and all other personnel, or something all inclusive, just to make sure that it's clear.
Yeah.
If
So
you work for the PD, you have to, this is the policy you have to follow.
right. So why don't we say, Linda, just go back from, there you go. And all other personnel. That would include dispatchers,
Mhm.
and they know that. There may be other times when we get a little more specific that we actually want to mention dispatch, and I think that would be helpful. In response to domestic violence calls, to include when the subject is a lot. Does everybody feel that language, when we talk about the subject is a law enforcement officer, is that language clear enough? Dan, is that clear enough for you, for the PD?
Yep, like you said, I mean, that
That's the term.
includes, yeah, that
That's the
includes
term
more
I would
than
use.
who would even be involved, so.
Right. Yeah,
We have a bunch of civilian staff and people that work in offices and records and stuff like that wouldn't even be involved in a call, so.
right. But they need to know, it would seem to me in this case, they would need to know this.
Yep, I'm saying the terminology that you're using here
Oh, when the
doesn't,
subject.
it doesn't not include anybody that would be
Right.
involved, so it
So
does
for
work.
example, let's say a clerk, a filing clerk is the subject of it would include them. Yeah,
Yes, well, right now you're in the part of the sentence that's the
Mhm.
people that are in response to the calls. So that would be the law enforcement officer and the dispatchers.
right.
And then the last part of the sentence here, to include when the subject is a law enforcement officer, that's
Or-
when
And
you
we
would
might
add
want to
the
say,
other
or
personnel.
other Bennington PD personnel.
Well, it's all other
Yep.
personnel, I believe, in any
Right.
with any agency.
Yep. Yep. Law enforcement officer, yeah, we want to make sure, and you could say after that, Linda, right there, for right now, and we'll take a look at it and see if we like it. When the subject is a law enforcement officer or other BPD personnel.
Well, Bruce, you want to make sure you include other law enforcement agencies too.
Well, that's when the
Yeah.
subject is
Yeah.
a law enforcement officer. That's why we're keeping that there. Dan, does
Right.
that make sense?
Okay, yep,
That
I
would
get it.
include sheriff, that would include state police, that would include,
Yep.
But also it would not include a state police dispatcher, or it
Right.
would not include a court employee, which,
and,
Probation.
yeah,
Probation.
probation.
yeah. Probation,
So how do we-
parole.
Do we, would they be included under, let me just ask the question so I can be educated. I was thinking of, say, court officers or probation and parole officers who, in Vermont, they're not considered law enforcement, correct?
I believe that's correct. I don't think they have any
But they would,
law enforcement
but-
certification.
but they would be included in the original domestic. So they would be,
Yep.
if, for instance, a probation and parole officer is the subject or the survivor in a domestic call, they would be included in this sentence. I mean, they would be included under this policy, correct?
Yes. Yep.
As
would-
we read it right now,
I mean,
they would to me.
yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean, it's the way that it's reading right now. It's all inclusive, and then it's just adding that it includes when the subject is a law enforcement officer or other personnel. So I mean, it represents everyday civilian as well as the personnel with the
Yeah.
agency.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we need to have, for that last line of the purpose one,
Yeah,
more clarification than including when the subject is a law enforcement officer, because in the next paragraph under policy, there's additional information, including when law enforcement officers or individuals in positions of power or influence are involved, which then gets to that broader thing.
true. Do we want to,
My only little editing comment is, and this, if this is silly, people can tell me and I'll be quiet, but I find where it says to include rather than including a little cumbersome.
I tend to agree with you. I don't like, I would say including.
I agree with that. Yes.
That's a, yep, so delete two and then just write, yeah, perfect. Don't, yeah, no, where you were was just fine.
There we go.
Yep. I think that's how it's gonna work, Linda. Great, thank you.
Bruce, I think I agree with Peter on that last or other BPD personnel kind of muddies it a little bit. Let's just, if it's not, I think it is correct.
I don't think it adds anything.
Yeah.
So we can delete that completely. Yeah. Yeah, and trust me, I will delete the footnote. It won't be necessary when we get done with that. Good. Is that enough for I think the purpose statement should be short, relatively short. By the way, before we leave today, we'll go back and take a look and decide if we need to add anything. Okay?
Actually, saving the footnote might be really helpful.
I had not yet, it may be.
Because it says, for the purposes of this discussion, the term officer is used throughout. However, agencies should utilize the same procedures for any individual, whether civilian or sworn, employed by a law enforcement agency.
Yeah, I probably would just modify that since this is part of the reason that footnote is there. I agree some of it could be kept as a footnote. But part of it is that this is a national model and therefore law enforcement agencies use all kinds of different things. Just go down to Texas for a minute and you'll see.
Yes, but they do reference.
But
Yes.
we could get rid of everything until just say the Bennington PD should utilize the same procedures for any individual. Well, actually, we're not asking them to use the same procedures.
Yeah.
Because they may have additional procedures if the subject or the survivor is a Bennington PD employee. Because they have additional responsibilities where they are employees. So it's something, let's think about that and move to policy and see if we may come back and we may have a better idea, which would be fine with me. Okay, folks. This is where our work is going to be mostly. So. Yep. And can I say, Peter, this is along the same line of your statement. It's something that I prefer, and that is, we don't need to start with, it is the policy of, you can just say, the Bennington PD shall provide a proactive or whatever. Since it's under the general heading of policy. But before we start doing too much wordsmithing, Here's where I think a number of our issues ought to be addressed. So I'm thinking paragraphs for policy. What issues do you think need to be addressed in this generalized, after an introductory statement? What kinds of issues do you think we need to address here in this particular section? Okay? Go at it. Tell me.
Well, I think Janice's point about some language regarding prevention would be useful in this, added to this.
I'm writing these down, so we'll just. I actually think there ought to be a section that deals with training, an actual policy around training
I agree.
to deal with things like, thank you, strangulation, the effect on children and others in the household. And none of this is to suggest that they don't get that training now. I'm just wanting it to be in the policy.
And domestic violence in the LGBTQ plus community as well, I think.
Yep.
And perhaps something in here as well about partnership. Would that be the place to put this?
I think so, yeah. So there, I'm looking at a policy statement that's going to be not unlike like the one for members, the Bennington PD's one for members, several paragraphs long. And I think that's perfectly okay. We can do that. We've done that before. I think we did that in hate crimes. We've done that in a variety of different policies. So it's perfectly okay. You don't need to have this sort of short and sweet statement. So far I've heard prevention, training. There's a paragraph on training, a paragraph on I don't know. What else? Oh, LGBTQI, yeah. That wouldn't be included under the training section.
Would that also be a place for persons of color?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And
which I
other
think is-
marginalized communities as well.
I
Yeah.
like that too.
Yeah.
And partnerships and establishing MOUs with other
MOUs,
agencies.
right.
The state police have I think, a good statement here,
Okay. Yep. Under,
policy.
yeah. Is that under their,
Well,
which one? 519 or 122?
519.
Okay. Uh-huh.
It includes what people's responsibilities are.
Yep.
Should I read it or do people have it? I don't know.
I mean, I think you could go
No,
ahead.
I
and-
haven't.
Yeah, I have it too, but I don't know if other people, why don't you just, it's not that long, Janice, why don't you read it?
Okay.
You'll give everybody a sort of a flavor.
It says effective domestic violence crime prevention requires a team approach. So that's one thing.
Yep.
The emergency communication dispatchers should gather information to safeguard the lives of responding members and the victim. The responding members should restore order and conduct thorough on-scene investigations. Supervisors should motivate, teach, and direct their personnel so that the members perform their jobs in a compassionate, professional manner. I particularly like that.
Yep.
But it focuses on roles. I don't know.
It does. And let's just look at that in relationship. Yeah.
What I like
I-
about this one, the policy one here, is the position of zero tolerance on domestic violence.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And also proactive victim-centered approach.
Yep. Or we would say now survivor-centered approach.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Are we all in agreement that we would change as much as possible the terminology from victim to survivor? That way I can get Linda to just start doing it whenever. Does that all make sense?
Yes.
Good. I'm
So,
seeing that.
Bruce,
Yes,
I
Can
have
just
one
before
thing.
we,
before
go
we go there, I'll get to you, Dan.
Dan, go.
Okay,
Oh,
Dan.
okay.
Oh, never mind.
Is it Dan or me?
It's you, Peter.
Okay. My question is again, maybe it's a sign of my age and being out of this for a little bit, but what, when we use the term survivor, what does that mean to the people on this committee?
Go ahead,
Well,
Lauren.
survivor would be problematic in the case if the person is actually deceased. Is that kind of
There
what
you
you're
go.
thinking, Peter?
Well, that gets to something. I mean, I agree. I have problems with the term victim, but because I know connotations of that are good and bad. Survivor, I don't have a clear grasp on, so that's what I'm asking. If we're going to use the term survivor, which I'm not opposed to, I would want to have a clear idea of what we're referring to. And maybe that be something that then be in the definitions.
Oh, if we're gonna use it, we absolutely have, I actually think we need to have a definition for the subject of the investigation and whatever word we're gonna use for the person who is the complainant.
Yeah, that's kind of along the lines I was going to go with. The term survivor, as much as it is a great term, I'm thinking myself with the legal paperwork that we handle, putting together the cases and everything. Our terminology that we use for every single criminal case is we have a victim, an offender, we have witnesses, and persons of interest and such. So I think just for to muddy it up less for the officers that complete the paperwork, I think the term should be victim. However, I wouldn't be opposed to having a definition of victim to in that terminology or in that verbiage to include the term survivor.
I think that could be one reason why in so many policy documents you see victim and survivor sort of interchanged. Because from an advocacy standpoint, obviously we are speaking of people who have survived domestic violence. Unfortunately, not everyone always survives it. But I can see where you're coming from as far as that point of view. Yeah, let me
I
think.
tend to think that this is something that we may address in definition section, but broadening this, there's also, and thinking from the legal and court arena, and if there's orders, there's always, in my career, there's always been a lot of discussion between using the terms plaintiff and defendant regarding abuse protection orders, using complainant and respondent, using those terms.
Right.
I think, those get used also, and we want to be sure that we're not adding a lot of confusion. And it may be just addressing this in a definition section would be where to do it. But we just need to be sure that the terms are easily understood.
I would agree with you. And we need to remember who the policy, particularly, I mean, the policy has two audiences at least. The initial and really important audience is the Bennington PD officers. It's the policy that's governing their behavior, so they need to understand it. But it's also a policy that I hope expresses a community sentiment about this kind of investigation, so that the community, it helps educate the community about domestic violence and domestic violence investigations. So that it helps as in that way as well. So the audience is also the larger community. And we'll see that tension in this drafting process. We've seen it all along, and we'll see again today. So what we're wrestling with, I actually wonder if, when we're talking about this, I do like the state police's focus on roles on the one hand, but I'm also interested in this language that talks about zero tolerance and thoroughness of investigation. I mean, I think this is what happens, but I still think we want to make sure that it's stated. So the notion here, and what I'm wrestling with sort of out loud, I apologize for that, but that's how I do this thing, is who's the center of the investigation? What's the center of concern in the investigation? It seems to me what this statement is suggesting is that and this is different than when I was first practicing law and dealt with a number of domestic violence issues in another state, in the great Empire State of New York. It wasn't always clear to me that this was a victim-centered, and I'll use that term, it didn't center around the person who was assaulted, the complaining witness, the complainant, for my terminology. And I think the push in the last 20, 25 years has been to move the investigation toward that person who was for lack of a better word, victim of domestic abuse, whether girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. Is there a way we can say that we're trying? I think it's important that this says it's proactive, that the center of the investigation is and you're right, Lauren, it's not, I mean, that's the dilemma of using survivor, is that the person may not always be surviving when responding to domestic violence. And in my view, the larger context, which is that whole domestic family dynamic that's going on oftentimes, that the officer has to address. So how do we say that in a sentence is my question, or do we? I think it's important to say, but I don't know how to say it without. People have any grand ideas?
I mean, the context of this paragraph is that it is survivor-centered.
Yep.
It says victim-centered.
But what this paragraph is really talking about is survivor-centered.
Right.
We could, what if we said this? And Linda, you can also cross out, it is the policy of, that goes as well. By the way, Linda's gonna listen to me. So if you want changes, just talk to me. It's easier for her rather than try to respond to voices out of a Zoom meeting. It's just, Even when we were all in the same room, it's hard for that scribe to do this way. So let's just try language and see what happens. The BPD shall, why not, provide a proactive, survivor-centered, and noting that I think we're going to have to do definitional work, approach when responding to domestic violence. And then period. Additionally, you can actually get rid of everything. The BPD, yeah. And I want to come to Janice's, I like a bunch of the language. Takes, and I'm not sure I like this, but takes a position of zero tolerance on domestic violence. And then start, okay? And after the word violence, period, that is right there, right where you are, Linda. Start with, and this I'm thinking of as a paragraph, which will lead to probably 2 or 3 sub-paragraphs. One about who's on the team, and it will include MOUs. And that may not be the first one, but it should be there. A paragraph about, and I'd like to hear from those of you who have more experience here in terms of children, the issue of children. So a paragraph there and a paragraph on training. And it may be that training takes up a bunch of that. So, but let me, Linda, right where we are, takes the position of terror, yes. After you have domestic, after that sentence about where it ends with domestic violence on line 18, you would then say effective domestic violence prevention requires a team approach. That we start with that language. Begins with a team approach. Granted, you don't have this in front of you, period.
Maybe requires would be, Bruce.
It's stronger.
What did I say? Oh, yeah,
Because-
requires.
Because,
Get rid of begins with and just writes requires.
right.
Get rid of with. Thank you. That's exactly right. Requires a team approach. And then I think it's okay to go through. What do you think? Do you think it's okay to go through the different roles here at this point? I think so. Then it becomes explicit. Who's all involved? Who are we dealing with here? So the first one is dispatchers. Dispatchers should gather information to safeguard the lives of officers, responding officers, and any other, I don't know the language now, but I want it more than the quote unquote victim. There's usually more people around in this process than just that person. So
it's to safeguard the lives of the responding officers and all other involved people
Well,
or
it's,
involved.
yeah, go
it's
ahead.
of the people, the folks being affected by this complaint.
Yeah,
Incident. I mean, we're
yes.
talking
The
survivor
other thing-
children and probably also offender. But
Yeah, I mean, I want to save the lives of, I want to safeguard the lives of everybody involved. So why don't we just say to safeguard the lives of responding officers and anyone else at the scene, including the survivor. for right now. Just putting it up there to look at it. And,
How about this, Bruce?
yep,
Responding officers and all other persons involved in the incident.
oh, I like that. What do you think? Okay, so we're gonna go back, the afters, officers, and you may need to say that again, all others,
All other persons
yep, and all other persons involved in the incident,
Yes,
involved in the incident. Great. And then you can get rid of including the survivor. That makes much more sense, period. Then I do want to talk about responding officers conducting a thorough on-scene investigation, and also what is the role of supervisors in this opening paragraph. It's generally an introductory policy paragraph that identifies the roles. So
I
We
like
could-
those last two sentences. From police.
of the IACP or the
Yes. No, the
of the
state police.
Oh, right.
See.
Do we need to say
The
that? Go ahead, Peter. Sorry, I'm in.
I just say the responding officers should restore order and conduct thorough on-scene investigations, period. Supervisors should teach and direct their personnel so that officers perform their jobs in a compassionate, professional manner, which is really just the last two sentences of the policy and this
Yeah,
state police document.
yep, I agree. I think I see a lot of head shaking.
Yeah.
That all makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so Linda. It would say, okay. Responding officers should restore order and conduct thorough on-scene investigations. On-scene is hyphenated, but that's okay. And then, yep. And after that, period, that's a period. And then supervisors should motivate, teach, comma, I'm gonna add, and direct their personnel, comma, so that officers,
Maybe they.
yeah, so that they, right, perform their jobs in a compassionate, comma, professional manner.
That's good.
Yep, I like that. And then the remainder of the IACP model can be crossed off. Ooh. Okay, now, nope, we're now gonna go under, that's,
Hey,
that's-
Bruce.
Wait a minute.
what did we
Yeah.
just do?
We
Well, when you-
eliminated, go ahead, Peter. Or who?
Well, I think say the same thing. You struck out from the IAC policy, the language, any domestic violence incident will be thoroughly investigated, including when law enforcement officers.
Oh,
or
no, yeah, we want to
Yeah,
make
we
sure
want
that's
that.
there.
We
Yeah.
want
We do
that.
want all of that, you're right. What was I thinking? Now, the whole thing, just reverse what you just did. And this will all be in one paragraph, I think. I'm looking at this as essentially as a single full paragraph. Does that make sense?
I think so, but I think we need the second paragraph, which.
Oh,
gets
we're
in-
gonna need, right. This is what I would consider to be Roman numeral 2, capital letter A. And then underneath it, or maybe, this is, don't worry about Roman numeral 2 again. This is all under policy. So either we're going to have 3 independent paragraphs A, B, and C, or this will be the opening paragraph and the next two paragraphs will be, and let me worry about that, will be basically how in policy, let's be a little more specific. So for example, since it's, let me give an example and we can move these around however we wish. The BPD shall enter into MOUs, memorandums of understanding. Maybe we want to, let's not, I'm just suggesting this for the moment, with service providers in order to facilitate support of the survivor and others in the incident, as well as provide training to BPD members as needed and necessary. Something like that. So that there would be, I think, in order for us to talk about, and maybe I need us to think also about what other kinds of teams, what other groups of people need to be involved in those teams. And Lauren, you're going to be much more helpful than me on that kind of language. And Dan, Dan Ferrara, you also are going to be more important than me. But I'm just trying to flesh out what a paragraph there should be about. What is this notion about a team-centered approach? What is that? Can we flesh that out in policy? And it seems to me we should. So, Lauren,
I was just going to say, I think that your initial sentence was a really good start, and I don't see it typed out. I kind of wish it was.
Okay, no, I probably can do that again.
Okay.
So, Linda, let me get it out there just so that we can tear it apart. Linda, are you with me? Yep. So, the BPD shall enter into, and I'm going to write it out for the first time because we're not going to use jargon, a memoranda of understanding, and then MOU, perfect, I love you, with community service providers in order to provide support for the, how did we talk about them up above?
Safety, I think safety, support.
Oh yeah, in order to provide safety, actually puts and provide after safety. Yeah, provide safety and support for the survivors or survivor.
No?
Yeah, like that.
Good.
Thank you.
And all others affected?
And others affected. And then you could say period. And then additionally, community service providers can provide, or yep, can or may, yep, that's better. May provide training and other resources for BPD officers or BPD personnel.
Great.
Does that make sense? Does it? I mean, it's not the only paragraph, but does it make sense, or do we need to add more? And it's not a question for which I know the answer.
I like that.
Yeah.
I don't think we're asking, I mean, This will not come as a surprise, I don't think, to the chief. I think the chief is actually looking for this. So it gives him direction.
And then we're going to flesh it out and go into which community partners and,
I think we could actually, you know, we could actually underneath that. I mean, I think we might want to say among the definitions could be the definition of again, a community service provider. And these would include, but not be limited to, such institutions as PAVE, could be Sunrise, could be UCS.
CAC. Does BPD have an existing MOU with the CAC,
What's the CAC again?
the Children's Advocacy Center?
I mean, with DCF,
Okay.
anything involving children, we mainly refer to DCF.
To
And then
DCF.
DCF,
And then
will take care
DCF
of-
goes to CAC.
Yeah, most likely.
I actually think, but under this but under a definition for this, you know, I could see the CAC coming in and doing a special training or providing training
Right.
regarding, you know, domestic violence and children for officers. You know, it could be among the things that officers, I mean, I think the state will mandate certain things, but I'd also think that there's, as Dan has told us more than once, there are opportunities that officers have for additional training, and I think to utilize local resources. This will not be the first time this has come up. Let's put it that way. Does that make sense, Dan? Oh, and by the way, Dan, I did want to ask you, Dan, for our
Yep.
training regarding domestic violence, I'm assuming is started at the academy. Is there mandated training after
There
that?
is.
That's
Yes,
what
there
I
is.
thought.
Yep. Actually, the last mandated training that we had regarding domestic violence actually hubbed around the LGBTQ community.
Good.
Dan, just sorry, I don't mean to derail the entire conversation, but who provides that training?
It varies. Right now with coronavirus, it is mainly done via
Zoom,
like
yeah.
webinar type stuff,
Yeah.
not Zooms, but just like online trainings. But at the academy, obviously, it's a classroom setting that we have a domestic violence instructor specifically for that.
Yeah.
And then, as I've stated in previous meetings involving our trainings, all of our trainings are approved by the Criminal Justice Training Council of Vermont.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything goes through them. It is 2:30 on my clock. And I'd like us to take a 5-minute break, just 5 minutes, and be back here. We're just going to leave everything open. And we'll take a 5-minute break and be back here at 2:35. That may not be enough in that paragraph, but we need to, let's just create a few paragraphs that will be in this. So move down to a new paragraph. And let me look at my list. You know, I think we can, I think in the definition section, we can talk about who these community service providers are, but do we want to,
But I also suggest maybe adding in there, playing an active role on the Bennington County Domestic Violence Task Force when that's up and running again.
oh, yeah.
So Bruce, I feel a little uncomfortable putting specific.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Okay.
We're going to come back to how specific demands we're going to make. And the word shall, we make, that was just my initial word, but I'm, perfectly happy with is encouraged to enter into or something like that. Don't change it yet, Linda. Just, I tend to think out loud. Which can be good and bad, but I think we need to to use language that, again, under this notion of team. So Linda, let's go back to Lauren's suggestion, but put it not in a new paragraph, put it right after other yep, right there. And and let me try language, and you're going to have to give me because this is all part of team-oriented approach to domestic violence investigations. The BPD is encouraged to become an active member of the task force. What's the name of it?
Bennington, yeah, Bennington County Domestic Violence Task Force.
Right. Can you sort of flesh out for me who that is and who are the
So
members of
it's,
the Bennington, it's Linda, Bennington County Domestic Violence Task Force?
yes. So that is the state's attorney, probation and parole, public defender's office, us, CAC, United Counseling Service, Manchester PD, Vermont State Police, Winhall PD were all present. I'm probably forgetting some additional community. Head Start.
Sheriff's Department is not, oh, Head Start, yeah.
Head Start, DCF is present. Easter Seals is present. Sunrise is present.
Okay, Yep.
It's quite a lot of people. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it's sort of
I know.
it's sort of been halted. So, but
Right.
once it gets going again, it would be great to have BPD there.
Mhm.
Bruce,
Yes,
like, I think it was Dan who said it too. I'm a little concerned about too specific language, because if we want this to last for a while,
right.
groups change. I wonder if we can describe,
The council, you mean, instead of,
Yeah. I mean, of community domestic violence. I don't know. Maybe-
yeah, I mean, I agree that probably worrying and having the name of a particular place. I mean, that's why I think down in the definitions, we can talk about can include, but are not limited to, and then give a list. But I
Or-
do think, but it would be nice to say encouraged to become,
How about, Bruce, how about saying something like is encouraged to actively participate in collaborative efforts to address domestic violence or something?
I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I like that.
So delete that, and yep, just right there, yep. Encouraged to actively, Dan, go back.
Actively participate in collaborative efforts to address, and I don't know what the words are, but
Address domestic violence
yeah,
in Bennington County.
sure.
well, yeah. The other thing is, we could include,
Address, Linda. Go
oh.
ahead. No, go ahead, Janice.
appendices or something like that, that provide resources, or other documents that provide resources.
Say that again, Janice, I'm sorry.
We could either have appendices or something, or maybe even just other resources.
Oh, you're frozen, or I'm,
She's frozen.
okay. And she did say that her internet can go out, so we have dealt, I mean, I think one of the ways in which we talk about this or have dealt with this in the past is I have made a list of things, either in a memo to go to the select board, or in this case, a memo to go to the chief. That would include, here's what we were thinking about, just so that the chief doesn't just get this particular document, but actually gets our thought process so that they understand. And I actually like that
Yeah, I'm back.
You're back. Good. Thank you. We got, basically, I said, we're talking about this in the context of also mental health responses, in the terms of hate crime investigation responses. So we're working on developing those lists of local community resources as well as others. And I'm keeping track of that and making, trying to send communications back to the chief whenever the list gets longer. And it usually does after each one of these meetings. So that's part of what my little task is to do.
Okay.
I want to go back to line 26 and see if we can find how about instead of shall, I'm trying to find language that doesn't sort of penalize, but actually tells the chief and others. Remember, our current chief, as he reminds me, will not be there forever, and we want to encourage the next chief. So I think we should, instead of saying shall, I only want to say shall when it's almost legally obligated. That's how I save that word. But is strongly encouraged to, or some language of that sort? Is that too weak? I think it basically says, look, you need to engage with the community. And I think he wants to do that. So I don't think that's a problem. Is strongly encouraged to enter into memoranda of, and so what that does is it just pushes the police administration to formalize what may already be a nice informal arrangement, but now then to formalize it. Does that make sense? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay.
Bruce,
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
switching
switching
over
over
to my iPhone.
Okay. Just turn the sound off the other one because we're gonna double back.
Yeah.
How we doing?
Well,
Is that better? Whoa.
No.
No, okay.
Oh,
Can I just leave that?
How's that? Can you
I'm
hear me?
leaving. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, Janice.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much clearer.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Are we good with that paragraph about team stuff? Doesn't mean that we're done. I'm just saying, are we good for now? And I'd like us to talk about other stuff that is derived from the first paragraph. So whether it's training or the scope of training. Dan, I appreciate that you guys just went through a whole bunch of stuff, including the LGBTQ community. I just want, and I don't want to create a list of trainings that they have to do. I don't think that's helpful in a policy. But how often is the mandatory training that you have to go through?
So after the regular academy training that
Yeah.
you go through becoming a full-time certified police officer, it is mandatory biannually.
Okay, I thought it was every 2. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 2 years biannually.
Biannually. So, and I also had issues around children, DCF, and Peter, I don't know where we want to go with in the interface with protection orders, abuse protection orders, and and also information sharing. I think there needs to be something in here about the scope of information sharing and to whom and with whom and how far. I mean, part of this is in sharing information with the local community providers. And I don't know how much of that is shared at the moment, but also with other, I mean, I'm thinking just of other PDs.
Well, is this part of this Roman numeral 2?
I'm still
Policy
thinking under
section,
policy.
or is this further on?
Peter, my dilemma about it being further on is if we get into anything further on is really procedure. And if we want to affect procedure, we
agree.
have to address it now. So Roman numeral 2 and Roman numeral 3 are our territory. So that's where we have to, if we have something that we want to say, we need to say it in there.
Well,
And I'm happy to let us try something. See what it
I'm
looks
not
like.
sure what the language is, but I'll say my concern and what I saw as something to be discussed regarding children is there's a disincentive to someone who's involved in a domestic violence situation if they think that the result of that could be that their children are going to be taken from them. And a survivor, a victim, however we want to use that, if they think that if someone who is experiencing being, surviving or experiencing domestic violence, that if they report it, they're then at risk that their children will be taken from them, they're not likely to report it.
Correct.
So how do we avoid that? How do we address that?
Well, and Peter, I think
And I
that is an
recognize some
issue.
of that procedure, but
It is in part procedure, but it is also part of, and it flows out of this idea of being a survivor-centered, taking a survivor-centered approach, and encouraging, in order to have effective prevention, we have to have reporting. So I think it's appropriate here. I don't know exactly how I would say it. Lauren, you were about to suggest something, I think.
I was just gonna say, like, is that something that can even be addressed in policy if police themselves are mandated reporters?
That was the other side of it.
Yeah.
Which is, it may be a bridge too far. Janice?
Well, DCF has their own policy about how they address children of domestic violence survivors or victims, in that they are discouraged or encouraged to keep children with the parent. That it shouldn't be grounds for custody. There needs to be a higher, I'm not sure I'm expressing it well, but being involved in a domestic violence or in a situation where a parent has difficulty being able to protect their children is not grounds for custody if they are, but more grounds for support in being able to become a parent that's protective of their kids.
Right. So it's not grounds for custody, but grounds for removal of the
Removal.
Yeah.
Removal.
Yeah. So I do think that there is a way to address both I think this is trying to become a sort of a survivor-centered, family-centered response that will actually produce more reporting, which will hopefully result in in more prevention. Is there a way to reference the working with the DCF and recognizing the needs of children to stay within family units as whenever it's in the best interest of the child? I don't want to get into a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, but it really is. Dan Ferrara, help me out here. I'm
a little unsure of how it would work in our policies and procedures to encourage reporting, because in essence, without it being reported, we're not actually involved at all. It's not like we go door to door and inquire if there's domestic violence inside and take action on that. We are only involved when someone calls the police with concerns of domestic violence, whether that be someone within the household, or maybe the victim or survivor has opened up to a friend of theirs and said, hey, my spouse is beating me and I don't know what to do, I'm scared. And we've had instances where that friend will call third party, say, hey, can you go check on blah, blah, blah. I'm being told that they're being abused in the home. So as much as I believe that it is a problem that instances don't get reported to us, I don't know how we would be able to solve that within our policies. Every time we do come across an instance of domestic violence, we obviously do work with the victim or survivor in letting them know of the different assisting agencies within the community, PAVE and DCF and everything like that. And we can do that once we are called because it's reported to us. But like I said, without it being reported to us in the first place, we can't have I just don't see where it could be in our policy to do that.
I know, I mean, to some degree, Peter's issue is a larger issue, but it's an issue in the sense, let me play devil's advocate with you for a moment. And I do this relatively well. Let's say you're called to a scene, and not only has the spouse been beaten visibly, you can tell it's been injured, but also a teenage child, say it doesn't matter, say a teenager of around 13, 14, and maybe even an 8-year-old.
Sure.
Do you specifically, do you file then a mandated report to DCF regarding the children and name, and if, I'm assuming you do, and if so, who do you, I mean, what Peter's getting at is the perception, and it may just be it may not be a real perception, but it's a perception that's out there, that the survivor may very well lose custody, at least temporarily, of their children if they report, and that's the issue that we're getting at. So if you could walk me through what you do, that would be more helpful.
Yeah, but again, just to start off with your scenario, that already involves us being called and responding there.
Yep.
So
you've been called.
Yep.
You're there.
So to give you an idea of what we do, we're investigating the incident itself. We get all of the stories from everybody involved, and what we do is, while we're still on scene, we will have a conversation with the state's attorney's office, a representative from the state's attorney's office, whether that be the state's attorney herself or one of the deputies. We get direction from them on the route that is recommended to take, whether that is who should be arrested, if there's children involved, do we want to take them right into our custody if they're not going to be safe? it's all direction that we take from the state's attorney's office. If, let's say, most common scenario would be we arrest the offender and then the children and the rest of the survivors are left at home or possibly getting medical care or what. If there are children involved, obviously as mandated reporters, we do notify DCF to do an intake report with them, and then it is up to them to complete their investigation on the household and whether or not children get removed or come up with a safety plan, or sometimes even nothing at all if they don't find that there's any consistent danger. But that's all in DCF's hands at that point. So we're responsible for what happens on scene, as we stated earlier, controlling the scene, completing a thorough investigation, and handling our legal responsibilities of at the very least reporting it to DCF.
Right.
And then DCF does their part.
But so every domestic call at the moment involves a conversation with somebody in the state's attorney's office.
That is correct. Yep, they are notified right away on scene.
Okay, while you're on scene, yeah.
Yep.
So they're making, oh, it's interesting. Okay.
Yep. Because they're in the end, they're the ones that prosecute our cases. So
Right. No,
they're
I
going to give
understand.
us the direction of
Yep.
what they can work with.
Right. No, I get that. I think if I were there, I would want that too.
Mhm.
Peter, what's your,
Well, I have a number of questions.
go ahead.
Before this, Dan Ferrara, if the Bennington police are called to a scene where there's been a call saying there's some domestic violence occurring, and two different scenarios. The first one, when there is no current abuse protection order, and the second one, when there is a abuse protection order, because I think those are different. In the past, in my experience, when there was no existing abuse prevention order, but there was an incident that seemed to be there was domestic violence or domestic abusive behavior, the survivor or victim, the person who was subjected to the abuse, was recommended that they get an abuse protection order, which did not, and again, this is in past, and if this has changed, I think it's a good change, but the person would then contact the court either then or the next day, and to get an abuse protection order, which would initially be a temporary, a TRO, and then within 10 days there would be a hearing, but the first one is ex parte. Most of the time, that initial one, the TRO, would be granted by the judge, but not always, because situation wouldn't necessarily be the kind that falls under the Vermont statute. For example, emotional abuse and financial abuse doesn't really trigger the statute
order,
for
yeah,
abuse
for an order, right?
But that would be done. I can tell you, both as an attorney and as someone who was acting judge, more than dozens, hundreds of times over my career on abuse prevention orders. I would have people coming who it really didn't trigger a abuse prevention order, but I'd say, what did this? And the complainant would say, well, the police told me I should get this. And I would be in the position, and actually as only an acting judge, not a regular judge who was do this, to say, well, this really doesn't fit under the statute, but you really should get a lawyer about a divorce, or what other
Right.
legal rights you have.
Right.
And because this is not under the abuse prevention or the stalking order.
Right.
But so calling the state's attorney now, if that's now the practice, I think that's good, because it's more likely that there'll be some analysis as to whether this actually fits under the abuse prevention statute. The situation regarding children is something that that my thinking about that is different, in that someone has a abuse prevention order against somebody, and there's children, but yet they're looking into, or they're discussing, or having through some fashion discussions, maybe through third parties, with the perpetrator about getting back. And then, and again, in the past, and I think this was a bad practice, so hopefully it's gone, but there's definitely have been times when, in the past, when the victim or survivor, the complainant, was told, well, if you let this person back into your life, we, meaning the state, which is a broader thing, are going to intervene and take your kids. So that's an issue. That may be an appropriate thing to happen, that the kids would need to be removed from that abusive situation, but it clearly is a disincentive to the survivor, the complainant, the victim to report.
Right.
Right. I think that would fall under kind of what we just did in our revision today of where did we put it? Perform our jobs in a compassionate and professional manner. Because although there's nothing legally binding us from saying something like that, obviously that's something that we shouldn't say. And that would kind of be a supervisory issue to address to that officer.
Yeah.
So I do get where that would be a concern if that were to happen. I know I can speak for myself. I've never done that or said anything like that. And I don't believe I've ever seen anyone say that. But I mean, I wouldn't put it past someone. I mean, people in any profession can make poor judgments in situations. So like I said, I do get the concern. However, as far as the APOs or abuse prevention orders, like you said, with domestic violence situations, when we respond to one, we call the state's attorney, whether we do make an arrest or don't make an arrest, or send it in for a case review to the state's attorney for them to kind of dive into it further to see what they want to do. We still do go over with the parties involved to let them know their options. We say, hey, do you know about PAVE? If you don't, or if you do, maybe PAVE can be of assistance to you in helping you through this process of possibly applying for an abuse prevention order. They can also, if that's something that you're not interested in, maybe you're just kind of hesitant to get out of a relationship because you're fearful, you can still talk with them, because it's my understanding anyway, that PAVE will assist them in any way they can, whether that be getting a cell phone of their own if they need it, getting housing, setting them up to be able to leave a relationship, because a lot of times in abusive relationships, it is a very controlling atmosphere for the survivor. Oftentimes they're not allowed to communicate, they're not allowed to have jobs, they're not allowed to have money, all of that. So it makes it very hard for them, even if they did want to leave, it makes it hard for them to leave because they're so tied into it. So reverting back to our policies and what we're able to do, it is something that we do is advise them of their options, advise them of the ability to get an APO. I know myself, I never tell them that they will get one. I say, at the very least, you can always apply, because the worst that can happen is, like you said, it just wouldn't fit, and they would be denied. And that would be worst case scenario. Best case scenario is it does get granted, and they would have that level of protection. So I don't know if that answered all of your points, or if you have any other concerns.
I think that addresses a number, and let me suggest something. We in the current Bennington domestic violence by members policy is under the policy. It's 2.1. It talks about it talks about a number of things, but it introduces it under sort of saying, while prioritizing the safety of victims, this policy is designed to, and then it lists a number of things. And one of them I'm not necessarily saying we use these particular ones, but it seems to me that, Peter, part of your issue is, and others, I think Eleanor raised this issue, and Janice did, and Lauren, you may have as well, is to provide, basically, when we prioritize the safety of victims and the community, we are, encouraging the use of abuse prevention orders when appropriate, coordination with Department of Children and Families when it's appropriate, and I would love to see. I think it's great that you now have this arrangement with the state's attorney's office. I think that makes sense for both of you. But it would just basically saying, in one of the reasons to put something into policy is to say, we really like this idea, and I think it makes all kinds of sense, and it may prevent a lot of foofara that I used to go through, and it might prevent some of this notion about if I call things in, I'm going to lose my kids. But we could list a number of things that would help with the safety, so that the policy is designed to create safety for the victim and the community in which that victim lives. So that includes kids. So what did I identify? Coordinating with DCF, coordinating with the states and the state's attorney's office with regard to, and providing access or knowledge about doing some of the things that you just identified, about APO, applying for APOs whenever appropriate. Does that begin to address some of the concerns? Because Peter, some of the stuff I'm looking at or I'm hearing is not stuff that a police policy can change. Some of it I think is statutory. I think we have to, for example, I actually have always thought that, and other states do this, where emotional abuse and other less physical kinds of abuse are grounds for providing an abuse prevention order, because they're that's oftentimes where abusers start, is they start with finances, and they start with all the stuff that may not necessarily be physical, just controlling. So that's, I'm wondering if a paragraph about that goes back to whatever language we had about safety, safeguarding the persons involved in the incident. What does that, without getting too specific, what does that look like? Is that an option? Doesn't have to be. I'm just wondering out loud.
Well,
And
Bruce,
Yes,
I
yeah.
have another thought.
Go ahead.
One of the things that this particular model policy has, which the others did not, but which I appreciated it having, was a section on what officers shall not do or say.
Right.
And so such things as provide any discouragement of victim reporting, threaten, etc., to discourage future requests for an event. I mean, that might be a place to talk about.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and
It's
it's
let's see, it's seventh section down. So which letter would that be? Wait a minute.
yeah, it's within the procedures, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
within the procedures, it's D,
Yeah.
procedures, Roman numeral
Yes.
4D.
Shall not do the following. But in any case, you know, that might be a section under. I mean, there were parts of this that are in procedure here that could be moved up into policy, and it might. What would happen, and I'm sure that there'll be people who will tell me why this is not a good idea. What would happen if that section of D, officers shall not do the following, or while responding to a domestic thing, officers shall not do the following. One, make any statement that would discourage a victim from reporting an act of domestic violence. I'm not saying, Dan, that they do that now. It's just,
Right.
This would be proactively saying, don't do that.
Right.
Threaten, suggest, or otherwise indicate the possible arrest of all parties to discourage future requests for intervention by law enforcement personnel. And 3, avoid taking action because the victim stated prosecutions was not desired, which I ran into a ton, but that's probably less likely now. You don't even need the statement of the survivor in order to prosecute, correct?
Correct. In the state of Vermont, it's the state that pursues the charges on the offender.
Right.
So technically, the victim or survivor does not need to be a part of that. However, to build a stronger case, obviously, it's very encouraged.
Sure. But do those statements?
That's one of the things that I always thought was important for clarification, that both the survivor and the perpetrator, that they know that it is not up to the survivor, victim, complainant to bring any violation of abuse prevention order to the court, that's up to ultimately the state's attorney, but the police reporting that. And I can also say that, and again, I'm not sure where this goes, but when I was an acting judge and also as an attorney with both clients who were survivors and with clients who were accused with perpetrating, that if they were the subject of an order, making it clear to them that it is not the other side that brings any charge, it's the state.
Correct. Yeah.
And that if I had a client who was a survivor, actually, let me talk about when I was an acting judge, because this would be clearer, and I would give this virtually every time I issued an order. after a hearing, I would say to the, in that case, the perpetrator or defendant, I'd say,
Right.
you cannot have contact with the other party. Even if the other party calls you, you have to hang up, because
Right.
they're not violating an order by calling you. You are violating this order by talking to them. And then I would say to the other person, I say, look, you heard what I just said to the defendant. If you call them and they say, I can't talk to you, and hang up, they're not being rude. They're doing what you both heard me say has to be done, that they can't talk. If you run into the person in the store, you have to turn around and walk the other way. Because if you don't, you're violating the order. And
Right.
again, it's not being rude or inconsiderate. It's doing what you legally have to do. Now, I could say those words. How many times people follow them is different.
Yeah,
But that's one of the things. And I think it's useful that the law enforcement officer make it clear that it's not the other party who is enforcing this, it's the state who enforces this.
And I think that would really increase survivor safety as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I that's one of the reasons why I would say that.
is there a place? And again, procedures, I'm always comfortable with the chief, let's say the chief saying to all of his or her officers at some point, here's what you can say and here's what you can't say, and lay it out.
Yeah.
In the procedures. Is there a place in policy to state, here's how what that, and this is where I'm coming from, what that investigating officer or officers, what they do in those first few moments after they get there and after any commotion is gone and they're now having a conversation with the survivor. What they say there is, I have found anyway, in my experience, to be critically important for the perception of safety on the part of the survivor. And I'm wondering if it's not inappropriate, and I know that's a double negative, to put something in a paragraph in the policy that basically highlights some of the items that we have just spoken about, that the officer shall or should, let's even just use that language, should indicate to the survivor that charges will be, if charges are brought, they will be brought by the state of Vermont, not by him or her.
And the alleged perpetrator as well.
Yep, and say that to both,
Right.
Yeah.
to all parties involved. And shall suggest whenever it's appropriate, that the survivor apply for, an abuse protection order. And not that you don't do it now, but that I think that there are some things that we would want to say and shall do what Dan, you already described, that you inform the survivor of the availability of other organizations, that community organizations that can assist them in this process. Could we have a paragraph that looks like that and see what it looks like? You want to try that?
I'd like to see that, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Okay, so
Maybe it's something along the lines of the policy of the Bennington Police Department is to not only prevent domestic violence, but also to provide protection to all members of the community from domestic violence.
Yeah.
And in doing so, the Bennington Police Department recognizes that all parties involved in a domestic violence incident have whatever and all remedy. I'm just.
I know. Just talking.
Yeah,
We'll
whatever
clean it up
all
later.
remedies, court and other legal remedies are available to them. Bennington Police Department also
Maybe just say
recognize
officers.
that are officers that decisions regarding enforcement of court orders is solely done by the state of Vermont and not by individuals, or not by either the
Either party.
survivor or the perpetrator,
Right.
something like that.
Yep.
Dan Ferrara, what do you think of that?
No, I agree. And I agree with all of you guys that it is an important part in this, because we want to encourage people to be able to come forward and not be afraid of doing what's best for them and their children if they're involved as well. So no, I'm good with that.
Good.
You think that's helpful? Language along those lines?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, Bruce,
Yes.
this might fit up under the department takes a position of zero tolerance to domestic violence.
Yeah.
And then bump the next section into another paragraph. But take about what does that mean when you take a position of zero tolerance
In domestic, on domestic
violence? It means that the state makes the decision about prosecuting or with this,
Yeah.
not the
Enforcing.
the state does.
Both enforcing orders and the prosecution. So there's all this language that people have in their brains that says, well, I don't want to press charges. Well, that doesn't work in this scenario. You're not, and they need to know that that's the case, that it's the state that brings charges, not the individuals. And both parties need to know that the state is the decision maker here, and the state's attorney decides what. So that's an interesting idea. What if, Linda, try the following. Go back up to where it says on line 18, domestic violence. Right. And why don't we just drop the next, just push the return button a couple of times so that it's, all right. Now, then takes a position of zero tolerance on domestic violence. And then say something like the following. Actually write just what I say, and we'll see what happens. And I'm going to try to incorporate some of what Peter said and what we've all been sort of saying. So while prioritizing the safety of victims, I'm going to use that word for the moment, victims and others involved in the incident, in the whatever the term it is we used before, officers shall inform or actually instead of shall, get rid of shall. Should inform all parties that the state of Vermont enforces all existing abuse protection orders. Probably want to capitalize those eventually. APO. Yeah. APOs. APO. Perfect. And makes all decisions regarding prosecution. Let me just move on to officers should not make any statement that would discourage a victim from reporting an act of domestic violence. Comma, reporting acts of domestic violence, comma, suggest or otherwise indicate the possible arrest of all parties in order to discourage reporting an act of domestic violence. Or avoid taking any action because the victim stated prosecution was not desired. I'm using language just right out of section D. We would eliminate that under procedure. That's just, now that's, none of that is perfect, but does that get at where we were? I'm looking to anybody. What do you think?
I can agree with that, but I'm also going to climb up on my soapbox here for a minute.
That's okay, go.
I'm just going to say that, you know, survivors have their own self-determination.
Right.
And what safety looks like for them may not be what we're expecting them to choose.
Absolutely true.
Right. So even if the police are called to a scene, you know, a survivor may not want to talk about it, but I'm wondering if it would be appropriate or possible to add something in there that, you know, outside of the criminal justice system, for survivors to plan for their safety, you know, there are confidential resources for them to talk to or something like that.
Oh, I mean, we might, yeah, we could, how about, since this is a police, after prosecution was not desired, period, officers should direct survivors to outside agencies and resources that will assist in creating a safe environment or something of that, or help survivors create their own system of safety. I don't want to disenfranchise them. I mean, but
right.
So in other words, we're just saying we're going to ask Ian to do what he would otherwise do.
Yeah.
Does that's
procedures subsection I?
Yeah, it is under, right. Right.
But I think having the broader statement in under this subsection 2 policies is a good idea.
Yep. What I'm hoping will happen, and the chief and I have already talked about this to some degree, is that what we do here in the language will direct and share. And, you know, I'm going to encourage the chief to include as much of this language from the IACP as possible. I think that's going to be part of my memo to him. And that is that there's a lot of good stuff that will help him, you know, in the formation of procedures. I mean, part of it is that there are, you know, lots of very specific, like under I, just how to think about victim safety. I mean, we're still dealing with a person who is self-determining. We have to, the one thing they don't get to determine is whether charges are pressed or charges are brought. That's the word I want. So that language, Dan, can you live with that language?
Yes. Yep. It's easy to follow and understand.
Yep. That's what we want. And how do other people feel? We okay with that? Janice, are you still there? Yeah.
Yes, I am. I am.
Does that make some sense? Is that sort of, I like the idea of that following the zero tolerance part.
Yeah, as this works its way through the process, there may be a little
We may need to tweak, yes.
editing of it, or,
Oh,
you know,
heck.
yeah.
Janice, I am convinced that it will require editing. We haven't done one yet that doesn't.
Okay.
So that's part of the process that this coming weekend, one of my little tasks will be to go through this and do just sentence structure editing so that it reads well. And that's when I send it back to you and say, have I changed the content?
Well,
Or
what
have
I
you-
see, yeah, is that it relates to the zero tolerance. It also relates to what we say later about performing jobs in a compassionate, professional manner. I
Yep.
mean, it's really, or an empathetic, maybe.
Yeah.
No, I guess.
No, I think it's, compassionate, right.
But I mean, I think this was included in this document because
Right.
police officers being human may try
Yeah.
to influence someone to take a safe stand, what they see as a safe stand, without
Right.
recognizing their right to do what they feel is right for themselves. Am I clear about that?
I agree. I think it makes, I think while I'm recognizing the time, holy God. Okay, let's move down. Let's say we've done in policy what we need to for right now and move down to under definitions. Yep, next page really at this point. So, I actually think that instead of, I do think the predominant aggressors, this is language that comes out of the IACP. Let me ask, I know that under, for example, line 19 now, protection order, we probably ought to use just the language of the statute. Unless we want to do, you know, and here's where I think we probably need to have additional, and here's my suggestion, that before we start looking at any particular policy definition, can we make a list of the additional terms we want to define? Such as community resource agency?
I think that's a good idea, Bruce. I have
Yeah.
what I hope is a quick process question for this committee.
Yeah.
Given 340,
Right.
really on the first page, although this is the most significant part. Will we be meeting again? And when would that be? I'm all for it.
Well, Peter, let me put it this way. It is my hope that we are not, but it is not my sense that we can't. And I haven't made any, so far we've not had to do that. The one that has come closest to needing to meet again was the responding to persons with mental illness policy. I think we've got that one resolved to the degree that we don't need to meet again. So if there are disputes, what I would like as much as anything is, generally speaking, if you give me direction, I can actually do some of this and then share it with you, and you can then respond. So my question about these, for instance, is, would it not be better to use, where it's appropriate, the actual Vermont statutory language, or at least a reference to the Vermont statute? It seems to me to make more sense that way than this sort of generalized language, which comes out of a generalized model policy for the entire country. And that's relatively straightforward to do.
That makes sense to me, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that makes sense. But going back to my earlier question, when the redrafting is being done and we look at that, are we looking at that separately, or are we going to look at that in another meeting?
No, we're not going to look at, we're going to look at it separately, and you're going to going to
Okay.
respond to me. But if I feel that you're responding,
That's fine. That's
Yeah.
fine.
that's what it
I
means.
think, yeah, I think that for the definitions, looking at domestic violence, I think it's probably better to say simply abusive behavior in any relationship as defined by Vermont statutes,
Yeah,
period, C,
period.
SEE, and then cite the Vermont statutes.
Right.
Rather than that is used to gain or maintain power
Yep.
and control over an intimate part or family or household.
Yeah. I agree. And then, so Linda, yeah, just cross all that part off. Don't worry about, yeah, right there. Delete, just push, yeah, thank you. Yep. And we can do the same thing under infinite part family. That section, the who's counted as in the relationships that are counted. I think I forget the statute number, but I know that the Vermont statutes do define that very clearly. So, yeah.
Yes.
Intimate, yeah, why don't we just cross that off, and that'll remind me to put in
Well,
the
maybe-
same similar kind of language
Yeah.
as defined in Vermont statute, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I think it's, yeah, I don't want to go by memory. I probably had it written down somewhere at one point. Can we, and I would say the same thing about an abuse protection order, or a protection order, and there may be,
Well,
besides, what do you think?
something that's a little more clear than this.
Yeah,
Or I'm- oh,
I wasn't fond of any of that. I mean, it is descriptive for those of us who know all this lingo, but I'm not sure that it's all that helpful. Linda, can you at least, no, don't worry about any of that for right now. Go down to the add an F. Yep, you're gonna add an F. Right. And the F will be, what did we call it? Community, what is it? What is the it's
Community
the
service providers.
or community service agency or community service provider, something like that. It's whatever language we used up above. I'll know what it means.
But are we also defining survivor / victim /
Yes.
complainant?
Yep.
Yes, yes. I think the
Yep.
three together.
Yes. Can you go down one more? We won't worry about, I know how to put that one. Make G. Right. So this would be survivor or, okay, victim, survivor / survivor / complainant. And
And the Vermont State Police has a good one there. If you take out victim in the definition.
right.
Rather than saying then who is a victim of domestic violence, who is the recipient of.
Yeah,
Something like
is
that.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
write down the following, means any person who experiences
Is-
domestic, who experience or has experienced domestic violence.
And this
I
includes.
I wouldn't say that because the perpetrator also is experiencing it.
That's true, yep.
I
Thank you,
would
Peter.
say has been subjected to.
Okay, yep,
I mean,
Okay,
well,
right, good.
that's what I'm thinking.
thank you. Has been subjected to
Domestic violence.
domestic violence.
And then I like the next, this
yeah, the
includes
next one.
persons who are unwilling to file charges or prosecute the offender.
Right. This includes, I would just say, yes, this includes persons who are unwilling to, well, they don't file charges.
Or
They're unwilling to cooperate.
What about participate rather than
I
cooperate?
I love that. That's much better.
yes, yes.
To participate. Thank you, Lauren. That's why we're all here. Participate in the investigation, in any investigation. Period.
Let's see, you've got dominant aggressor already somewhere.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
the person is more likely to perpetrate a physical. I tend to like the definitions from the state police. And
I do too.
yep.
yeah.
So as much as possible, what I'll try to do, if you don't mind, is include, I don't think I need to include what probable cause is. That doesn't strike me as, unless somebody thinks I need to.
Well, I don't know how, I can't recall how it's used in the IACP document. I mean, if we,
Probable cause?
yeah. It is in the state, it is in the Vermont State Police one. You want,
Probable cause is a generalized, it's a generalized term that doesn't really apply specifically to domestic violence. I was having a difficult time trying to figure out why it was there. That's all.
Because they use it as when you file an arrest
Except that
charge.
that's a
Make arrest
decision that,
charge.
the state's attorney makes in our situation, not the,
Oh, okay.
yeah, the Bennington PD are not making charging calls. And
Okay.
I
No, but
actually
they
don't
are
think the
doing,
state police did either.
they are submitting affidavits to the state's attorney outlining what they consider to be the probable cause. And that's what the state's attorney
Yep.
bases the charging decision on. However, I agree. I don't think we, in this document, we need to have that definition of probable cause.
No, it is clear that the officers need to know what probable cause is, but they do. Or if they don't, they're gonna get a workover from the state's attorney. At least that's what I used to do when I was a prosecutor, briefly.
Yeah.
I would explain to that officer just exactly why this is not probable cause.
But
So,
before it gets to the
Well,
state's
read
attorney,
over
they get
the-
work over from their supervisor.
right, yeah, probably.
Yeah. It does address some of the issues that come up in a domestic violence investigation, though.
Yeah, it talks about what they shouldn't
Specific.
determine.
They should not. Yeah.
Right.
Right. I
That
don't
list
know.
of 10 things.
Yeah. I don't know.
But I still, those are all, hopefully that's under the general knowledge of Bennington police officers, my hope. Maybe that's wrong. If you know, when you get this back in like next Monday or Tuesday, and if you still feel strongly that it ought to be there, let me know. That's perfectly okay.
Okay.
You know, it'll just be longer.
As it will.
What other definitions do you think are missing, and what, I mean, I will work over I think I have seen a better definition of protective order or order of protection, but I think I want to stick pretty closely to the language of the statute.
Mhm.
And I'm
I'm wondering, yeah, I
Go
agree
ahead.
with you on that, Bruce. I'm wondering if the definition of self-defense that is in the state
Defense.
police document, whether that's useful to have in there, because under the IACP
yeah,
model policy procedures, there is a reference to self-defense.
Yep.
So I'm wondering whether that should be,
yep.
whether that's useful to have it in. Frankly, I'm split on that, but I
am too, but if it ends up, I think if the chief ends up including much of the ICP procedures in there, and the very fact that it's in the state police policy, I think that I actually don't, yeah. Why don't we put it in and see what we feel about it when you get it back? So we're gonna create an H for right now. Just write down self-defense and put CVSP-DIR-519. I'll know what that means. -519. Thank you, Linda. So you'll see it as it appears in the state police, unless you want to change any of that. I think it's exactly right. Shall we have about 10 minutes.
Huh.
Shall we? Yeah. Time flies when we're having a great time. I may need to go for a walk when we get out of here. Let's go back up to the very top.
I'll walk in the snow.
Yeah, I know. It's doing it.
Yep.
That's all right. the dog will be happy.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back and take a look at purpose. The purpose of this policy is to establish Bennington Police Department priorities, guidelines, and procedures to be followed by law enforcement officers and all other personnel in response to domestic violence calls, including when the subject is a law enforcement officer. That's what we wrote in part. Do we still like that? I see Eleanor nodding her head. That's good.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Dan, you okay with that?
Yep.
Got it. Good. Dan Monks, you still there?
I'm here and it's fine with me. Yes, that section.
Great. I think I see smiling faces mostly, and Janice, I can't see you, but I know you'd speak.
I'm nodding, yeah.
Oh,
yes.
good. Okay. So then we go down to policy. And the first one, as you can read it, it's the BPD shall provide a proactive, survivor-centered approach when responding to domestic violence. Additionally, the BPD takes a position of zero tolerance on domestic violence while prioritizing the safety of victims and others involved in the incident. Officers should inform all parties that the state of Vermont enforces all existing abuse protection orders, APOs, and makes all decisions regarding prosecution. Officers should not make any statements that discourage, not discourages, discourage victims from report. Shall we say survivors at that point? I'd like to. Write in survivors.
We might end up putting survivors / victims or something.
Yeah,
I
we
don't know.
may.
Right.
Yeah, I think that might make sense. Yep, do it at least once. You don't need to go from reporting acts of domestic violence, suggest or otherwise indicate the possible arrest of all parties in order to discourage reporting of acts of domestic violence, or avoid taking any action because the victim stated prosecution was not desired. Officers should direct survivors to outside, I don't like outside, to
Confidential?
what was the term that we used just before?
Community?
Community
Yeah, the
survivors.
community.
Could we also add confidential there, though?
Where?
Because somewhere in there, because our services are confidential, which is
Oh, I see.
different than like the victim's advocate with the state's attorney's office.
Right.
But wait. I mean, I recognize that PAVE is confidential, but
Mhm,
it's not the only community agency that people would be referred to.
That's true.
And so the confidentiality is implied in if you're referred to PAVE.
No, they will then.
Then
Right.
only confidential, then,
Okay.
for example, now referring people to financial resources.
Right. I see what you're saying, Peter.
Yep. And actually that could be part of an, you could put almost anything that you want. You could come to an agreement with the PD about how you want PAVE to be introduced to survivors, victims in an MOU. So, I mean, I think they should be given that option, but that would come out as a result of the MAU, not as out of. So I do think community agencies, community resource, anyway, community agencies. and
Service
resources-
providers.
Yeah, that's right. Or, yeah,
I thought we used the word community service providers, but
I think we did. And don't worry about, yes, we did. Okay, community, yeah, just say community service providers. Thank you,
So-
Dan.
Before we leave this paragraph,
Yep,
wonder if we want to back up at the top when we're saying, what we provide and where we say a survivor-centered approach, whether we want a survivor and family-centered approach.
I like that idea better. I'd like it to be broader, and that actually would connect it with the mental illness investigation policy that we're in the midst of drafting. We always talked about that as, not just the individual, but the larger context. That might make sense. So survivor and family-centered approach. Does that make sense, Peter? Is that where you were?
That's I just have to say, I just got a notice from my phone that I'm running out of battery.
Okay. We're running out of time too.
Yeah.
Just if you see other things, let's, Linda, can you drop down a bit? I think we're there. Let's just look at those two things briefly. Requires a team approach. That's where we talked about just and responding officers should restore order. Yep, that works out. And then strongly encourages to enter into MOUs with community service providers. Thank you, Dan, in order to provide safety and support for the survivors / victims probably and others affected.
Bruce,
Is affected AFF or EFF?
I was going to have to look that one up.
I think it's A, but
I think you're right. I think it's AFF.
Bruce,
I always look that one up.
while we're all still on the call here, I do have a suggestion for that sentence that I think works a little bit better. I'd be happy to talk with you offline or
Go ahead. You want to just run in it?
Okay, yeah, instead of that, basically replacing that first sentence with the following, it would say the BPD will work with community service providers to provide safety and support for the survivors and others affected, including when appropriate and entering into memoranda of understanding.
Oh, I like that better.
It's just, it's more like they're going to work with people and what it's going to include, it will include also memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense. So Dan, you're going to have Linda do that.
Yes. If people are okay with that.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we are. That looks good. That's going to make that a much better sentence. And it's going to put the emphasis where we really want to, is really going to work with other people. Yep. Yep. I think we're good.
Whew.
Listen, everybody, a happy 3 hours later. I want to thank you, but your work is not done. You will be getting an email from me with this attached. It'll have all these marks. You may send it back to me with either just lists of corrections or suggestions, or you can mark up your own version, just don't use red. Okay? Eventually, this marked up version, at least all the way through what we've worked on, will go to the select board, not the procedures. However, if you have issues on procedures that you want to emphasize, and Lauren, I'm looking at you as well, particularly on that, because you mentioned some things, and Peter and anybody else, if you want to do that, particularly around procedures, make me a list and send it to me. Okay? Because I'm going to write up a memo for the chief. He wants me to do that with him, and that's helpful. Okay?
Okay.
Are we all good? Peter, you're almost out of battery. Dan?
Well, I was able to plug in, so now I've got battery.
Oh, good. And Officer Ferrara, before I let you leave,
Yep.
I am supposed to ask you a question. Are you willing to do this again over another 7 or 6?
I will.
Oh, what a champ. Thank you. I so much appreciate it. Look, again, can I just say, just on behalf of the select board, but also particularly myself, your expertise and willingness to work on this and energy is highly appreciated. You know, when people say we don't really have resources here in Bennington, I can now list any number of people who we can prove them wrong. And so thank you so much. Feel free, by the way, to look at the list of new ones when you get it, the ones that are coming up, and feel free to apply again. Because I think you'll all have a much better sense of what I think we'll do. I think Dan and I are in it for the long haul. Or at least as long as I'm alive, whichever comes first. Thank you, everybody. Unless you have something else to do, we can close this meeting. Without a motion
Thank
to
you.
adjourn, we're done.